I received the call about my grandmother passing on a dreary Tuesday afternoon. She was the only one who truly understood me, who protected me when everyone else looked the other way. Through tears and the hollow ache of grief, I opened the email from her attorney. The will was clear, everything went to me, with no mention of my father or golden stepbrother Trevor. Then my phone rang, Dad's name flashing on the screen, his voice already trembling with rage. Let me know where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button, as I tell you how my inheritance nearly tore what remained of my family apart. Growing up, it was always just my mom, my grandmother, and me. We formed a tight-knit triangle of love and support that seemed unbreakable until my mother was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer when I was 11. I watched helplessly as she deteriorated over the following year, her once vibrant smile dimming with each hospital visit. By my 12th birthday, she was gone, leaving a void in my life that nothing could fill. My grandmother stepped in immediately. She moved into our home and became my rock during those dark days. She was a remarkable woman, strong but gentle, with wisdom etched into every line on her face. Her silver hair always neatly styled her clothes. Simple but elegant, she carried herself with a dignity born from overcoming her own hardships. At night, when grief would hit me hardest, she would sit on the edge of my bed telling stories about my mother as a young girl, keeping her memory alive through words and shared tears. My father, on the other hand, retreated into himself after Mom died. Richard Davidson was never an emotionally available man, but her death seemed to harden something inside him. Tall and perpetually frowning, he buried himself in work, often not returning home until I was already asleep. Our conversations became shorter mechanical exchanges about school grades and household necessities. The warmth that had occasionally broken through his reserve when Mom was alive disappeared completely. Just before my 14th birthday, Dad announced he was remarrying. Jessica entered our lives like a whirlwind, bringing with her expensive perfume designer clothes and her 16-year-old son, Trevor. From the beginning, it was clear that our home would revolve around them now. Trevor needs the larger bedroom for his sports equipment. Dad informed me one evening, not meeting my eyes. We will move your things to the smaller room this weekend. That was how it began. Small adjustments that gradually revealed where priorities lay in our new family dynamic. Trevor needed new cleats for football. Trevor needed tutoring for his college applications. Trevor needed a car for his 16th birthday. Meanwhile, I learned to become invisible, to need less, to expect nothing. My grandmother watched this transformation with undisguised disapproval. During our weekly visits to her modest but immaculately kept home, she would study my face, noting changes that even I tried to hide. "They cannot diminish your worth, Clyde," she would say, her voice firm with conviction. "What your mother and I have given you, nobody can take away." The tension between my grandmother and my father grew with each passing month. At family gatherings, their interactions were coldly polite at best, openly hostile at worst. Jessica made no effort to bridge this divide, instead making subtle comments about outdated parenting and modern family dynamics whenever my grandmother expressed concern about how I was being treated. "Your grandmother is stuck in the past," Jessica would tell me, her manicured hand dismissively waving away any suggestion that Trevor received preferential treatment. "Families work differently now. Your father and I believe in encouraging excellence, and Trevor simply excels in more areas." Trevor himself seemed to thrive on the attention. Tall and athletic, with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, he accepted his position as the golden child without question. While never openly cruel, he regarded me with the casual indifference of someone acknowledging furniture. Through it all, my grandmother remained my sanctuary. She encouraged my academic interests when my father barely noticed my straight-A report cards. She taught me about saving money, investing wisely, and being self-sufficient. From her modest teacher's pension, she set aside funds for my college education, something she confided in me, but kept from my father. "Education is freedom, Clyde," she would say, as we reviewed college brochures together. "Your mother knew that. She would want you to have every opportunity." As my high school graduation approached, the contrasts in our household became increasingly stark. Trevor was applying to prestigious universities, with my father hiring specialized consultants to perfect his applications. My own college plans were met with distracted nods and vague mentions of community college being more practical. My grandmother intervened decisively. During a dinner she insisted on hosting, she announced that she would be financing my education at whatever university accepted me. Clyde has earned this opportunity through his own merit, she stated, her gaze challenging my father to object. His mother would be immensely proud of him. The silence that followed was deafening. That night I overheard Jessica and my father arguing about my grandmother's interference in playing favorites. The next morning Trevor glared at me across the breakfast table. "Must be nice having a rich grandma in your pocket," he muttered. "Some of us actually have to work for what we get." The irony of his statement might have been amusing if it had not so perfectly encapsulated the distorted reality I had been living in. At 18 I left for college with my grandmother beaming proudly at the airport. My father and Jessica declined to accompany us, citing Trevor's football tournament as a priority. As the distance between us grew both physically and emotionally, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time I could breathe without the constant pressure of trying to be seen in my own home. During my junior year of college, I received a call from my grandmother that changed everything. Her voice, normally so steady and reassuring, trembled slightly as she informed me she had been diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer. "I need you to be strong, Clyde," she said, her practical nature asserting itself even in this moment. "The prognosis is not good, but we will face this together just as we have faced everything else." I immediately arranged to take a semester off, moving back into her home to care for her. The small two-story house where I had spent so many happy hours now became the center of my world as I balanced nursing duties with online classes. My grandmother, despite her waning strength, insisted I not abandon my education entirely. "Your future remains important," she would remind me during her more lucid moments between pain medications and treatments that seemed to drain more life than they preserved. My father reacted to the news of her illness with detached concern, calling occasionally but visiting rarely. When I confronted him about his absence, his excuses ranged from work commitments to Trevor's college visits. "She understands how busy we are," he said dismissively during one phone call. "Family means different things to different people, Clyde. Your grandmother and I have never seen eye to eye on that." Trevor and Jessica made appearances at the house every few weeks, their visits brief and awkward. I could not help noticing how their questions inevitably turned to practical matters of the house, the vintage car in the garage, or the antique furnishings that had been in our family for generations. "Has she updated her will recently?" Jessica asked during one visit, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a discreet whisper as my grandmother napped in the next room. With medical costs being what they are, it is important to have everything in order. The tension escalated when my grandmother mentioned to my father that she was meeting with her attorney to revise her will. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I overheard their conversation in the living room, turning heated. "After everything our family has done for you," my father said, his voice rising, uncharacteristically, "Trevor is as much your family as Clyde is. This preferential treatment has gone on long enough." "Richard," my grandmother replied, her voice weak, "but determined, you relinquished any say in my affairs when you chose to neglect your own son. As for Trevor, while I bear him no ill will, he has benefited exclusively from your attention and resources. My responsibility is to protect what Margaret intended for her son." That evening, after my father left in a cloud of barely suppressed fury, my grandmother asked me to sit with her in the garden. The spring air was cool, but she insisted on being outside among her beloved roses. Wrapped in blankets on the porch swing, she took my hand in hers, her skin thin and translucent in the fading light. "There is something you need to understand, Clyde," she began, her eyes holding mine with unusual intensity. "The assets I have, this house, my savings, the investments, they are not entirely mine by origin. Half of everything came from your mother." I listened in shock as she explained how my mother had inherited significant assets from her own father, a successful businessman who had died when she was in college. Rather than spending this inheritance, my mother had invested it wisely, growing the modest fortune with my grandmother's guidance. "She always worried about your future," my grandmother continued, her voice catching. "After her diagnosis, she transferred everything to me with explicit instructions that it would ultimately go to you when you were mature enough to handle it responsibly." A profound sense of connection to my mother washed over me. All these years she had been protecting me, still reaching through time and through my grandmother to ensure I would have the resources to build a life on my own terms. Your father was never good with money, my grandmother added, a hint of the old steel returning to her voice. Margaret knew that. She also recognized, even before Jessica and Trevor came along, that Richard would always make choices based on his own comfort rather than your well-being. 2 months later, I held my grandmother's hand as she took her final breaths. The pain of losing her was unlike anything I had experienced since my mother's death, a deep, physical ache that made it difficult to breathe. She had been my anchor, my advocate, my connection to the mother I had lost too young. The funeral was a subdued affair attended primarily by her former colleagues and a handful of neighbors. My father and Jessica sat stiffly in the front row beside me. Trevor slouched uncomfortably in a suit that seemed too tight around his neck. None of them had shed tears, their expressions ranging from solemn boredom to barely concealed impatience. 3 days after we laid her to rest, we gathered at her attorney's office for the reading of the will. Mr. Patterson, a gentle, silver-haired man who had been my grandmother's friend for decades, greeted us with somber formality. As we settled into the leather chairs of the conference room, I noticed my father leaning forward expectantly, Jessica's hand resting possessively on his arm. Margaret Elizabeth Carter's last will and testament is straightforward. Mr. Patterson began adjusting his reading glasses. To her grandson, Clyde William Davidson, she leaves her entire estate consisting of her residence at 1482 Maple Street, all its contents, her vehicle, her investment portfolio, and all monetary assets in her accounts. A stunned silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of Mr. Patterson turning pages. The total value of the estate is approximately $750,000, he continued, glancing up briefly. There are no other beneficiaries named in the will. That is absurd. My father's voice exploded across the table. There must be some mistake. Where am I mentioned? And what about Trevor? Mr. Patterson removed his glasses slowly. There is no mistake, Mr. Davidson. Your mother-in-law was explicit in her instructions. Furthermore, she anticipated your objection and prepared this letter to be read in such an event. As the attorney read my grandmother's letter explaining her decision, citing my father's years of emotional neglect and the stark favoritism shown to Trevor, I watched the color drain from my father's face, replaced by a deep, mottled red of rage. This is manipulation. Jessica interjected, her carefully maintained composure cracking. She has poisoned Clyde against us for years. We will contest this. Trevor stared at me with naked hostility. You think you deserve all this? What have you ever done except play the victim? I am the one who has contributed to this family. I am the real son here, not you. As we left the office, my father gripped my arm tightly. This is not over, he hissed. Family does not do this to family. You will make this right, or you will no longer be my son. The week following the will reading was a bombardment of text messages, voicemails, and emails from my father, Jessica, and occasionally Trevor. Each communication escalated in tone from guilt-tripping to outright threats. This is not what your mother would have wanted, one message from my father read. She would be ashamed of your selfishness. The invocation of my mother, whose memory had been largely ignored by him for years, struck a particularly painful chord. I found myself second-guessing everything, wondering if I was indeed being selfish, if my grandmother had somehow misunderstood my mother's wishes. On Sunday morning, a forceful knocking at my apartment door jolted me awake. Through the peephole, I saw my father and Trevor standing in the hallway, both wearing expressions of grim determination. We need to talk, my father said, as I opened the door, pushing past me into my living room without waiting for an invitation. Trevor followed his athletic frame, seeming to fill the small space with latent aggression. My father thrust a document onto my coffee table. This is a simple agreement transferring half of your grandmother's estate to Trevor. Sign it, and we can put this ugliness behind us. I stared at the paper, then back at my father. I need time to think about this. To talk to a lawyer. There is nothing to think about. His voice rose sharply. This is about doing what is right. Your grandmother was a bitter, controlling woman who never accepted Jessica or Trevor. She did this to punish me, not to benefit you. That is not true, I said quietly, feeling a strange calm settling over me. She did this because she was honoring Mom's wishes. Do not bring your mother into this, my father snapped. Margaret would have wanted her assets distributed fairly among family. Trevor is not her family, I replied, the words escaping before I could consider their impact. And from what Grandma told me, she was very specific about wanting to protect me and her assets from you. Trevor stepped forward, his face contorted with anger. You think you are special. You think you deserve everything. You have been playing the poor, neglected stepson for years, but everyone sees through it. You are pathetic. I am not signing anything today, I said firmly. I suggest you both leave. My father's expression shifted from anger to calculated coldness. If you insist on this path, we will contest the will. We will argue that your grandmother was not of sound mind when she made these decisions. Do you really want your family's private business dragged through court? Do you want everyone to know how you manipulated an elderly woman for your own gain? I felt a flicker of doubt, but then remembered something. Excuse me for a moment, I said, walking to my bedroom. From my desk drawer, I retrieved a sealed envelope my grandmother had given me the day before she entered hospice care. If your father challenges my decisions, open this, she had said. I hope you never need it. I broke the seal, now finding a USB drive and a handwritten note inside. The note explained that the drive contained recorded conversations between my grandmother and my father from the past 5 years. Returning to the living room, I connected the drive to my laptop and played one of the files. My grandmother's voice, stronger than in her final days, filled the room, followed by my father's. I need $30,000 for Trevor's car, my father was saying. You have more than enough saved. That money is for Clyde's education, my grandmother replied firmly. Clyde can get student loans like everyone else, my father argued. Trevor has a chance at a football scholarship if he makes the right impression. That means the right car, the right clothes. So this is about appearances, not necessity, my grandmother observed. It is about investing in the child with potential, my father responded bluntly. We both know Clyde is never going to amount to much. He is too much like Margaret, head in the clouds, no practical ambition. I stopped recording, the silence in the room, thick with shock. Trevor was staring at my father, with an expression I had never seen before, something between disbelief and dawning comprehension. There are dozens more conversations like this, I said quietly. Grandma documented everything. There is also evidence that you tried to pressure her into signing over control of her finances to you last year, claiming she was becoming confused when she refused to pay for Trevor's spring break trip. My father's face had gone pale. You are bluffing. Am I? I turned to Trevor. Did you know they tried to access my college fund? Did you know that the family vacation to Europe last year was paid for with money they convinced my grandmother to give them by claiming it was for property taxes? Trevor looked between us, uncertainty replacing his earlier aggression. Dad, what is he talking about? He is lying, my father insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Your grandmother was manipulative, Clyde. She recorded conversations selectively out of context. I am not going to sign over anything I said, finding strength I did not know I possessed. The estate is legally mine. It was my mother's wish, and my grandmother's. I will not dishonor their memory to appease you. Then you are no longer my son, my father declared, his voice cold. I stopped being your son the day Mom died. I replied, the truth of it settling into my bones. I was just too young to realize it then. Trevor remained silent as my father stormed toward the door. As they left, I caught a glimpse of confusion, and something like respect in Trevor's eyes. My father's parting words were a promise of legal action that we both knew would never materialize, not with the evidence I now possessed. 6 months after my grandmother's passing, I had settled into a new rhythm of life. Using part of my inheritance, I completed my degree without student loans and purchased a small condominium near the university, where I had accepted a position in the administrative office while applying to graduate programs. The remainder of the money I invested according to the principles my grandmother had taught me, setting aside a portion for a small scholarship fund in her name at the local community college. Living in her house had proven too painful, too full of memories, so I had sold it to a young family who appreciated its character and history. My father had made good on his threat to cut contact, though the promised legal challenge to the will never materialized. Jessica occasionally sent text messages alternating between guilt trips and thinly veiled requests for financial assistance, which I politely declined. It was a crisp autumn day when my phone displayed a number I did not immediately recognize. Answering with caution, I was surprised to hear Trevor's voice. "Clyde, I would like to meet with you," he said, his typically confident tone replaced by something more hesitant. "Just you and me, no parents involved." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near my condo. When Trevor arrived, I barely recognized him. Gone was the cocky, athletic posture, replaced by someone who seemed smaller, somehow less certain of his place in the world. "I moved out," he said without preamble, stirring his coffee unnecessarily. "After what happened at your apartment, I started noticing things. The way Dad and Mom talked about money, about you, about your grandmother, when they thought I was not listening." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly for perhaps the first time in our lives. "I found out they had been lying to me for years. About college funds they claimed were set aside for me that never existed. About promises they made to help with my student loans that they never intended to keep." I listened as Trevor described his gradual awakening to the manipulation that had shaped our family dynamics. How he had been used as a pawn in their games, elevated and praised not out of love, but as a tool to hurt others, to extract resources to maintain control. "I am not asking for money," he clarified quickly. "That is not why I wanted to meet. I just thought you should know that you were right. About them. About everything." Something shifted between us in that moment, a lifetime of artificially created rivalry, dissolving in the face of shared understanding. We were both victims of the same manipulative parents, just in different ways. Over the following months, Trevor and I developed a cautious friendship. He found work at a local gym while taking night classes, determined to build a life independent of our parents' influence. When he struggled to make rent during a particularly tight month, I helped without hesitation, not from obligation but from genuine concern. Using a small portion of my inheritance, I established the Margaret and Elizabeth Memorial Scholarship, specifically designed to help students who had lost parents or were estranged from their families. Watching the first recipient, a young woman with circumstances painfully similar to my own, accept the award brought a sense of completion, of honoring the two women who had shaped me with their love and foresight. In quiet moments, looking at the photograph of my mother and grandmother that now sat on my desk, I found myself reflecting on the true nature of inheritance. The money and property had provided security and opportunity, yes, but the real legacy they left was in the values they instilled in me. The courage to stand up for myself, the wisdom to recognize manipulation, the compassion to help others without exploitation. I had learned that sometimes protecting yourself means standing firm against even those who should love you most. That family is defined by actions, not blood or legal documents. That the most valuable inheritance is not what can be counted in dollars, but what can be measured in character. As Trevor and I rebuild what our parents tried to destroy, I carry my mother and grandmother with me in every decision, every act of kindness, every boundary maintained. They watch over me still. I believe proud of the man I am becoming, in spite of, or perhaps because of the challenges placed in my path. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have shared the inheritance or stood your ground? Comment below and let me know your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Share this with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself is not selfish, but sometimes necessary for healing and growth. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth is never determined by those who fail to see it.